So good day everyone. Today I am discussing the some of the different international well-known authors. First, we have William Shakespeare, 1564 to 1616. He is an English poet and a playwright, and his famous play, which are Macbeth, Romeo and Juliet, and Merchant of Venice and Hamlet. Next is Jonathan Swift, 1667 to 1745. He is a prominent artist, essayist, and author. His notable works are Gulliver's Travels in 1726 and A Modest Proposal and A Tale of Tob. Next, Samuel Johnson, 1709 to 1784. Samuel Johnson is a British author best known for his compilation of the English Dictionary. Next, we have Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, 1749 to 1832. Johann is a German poet, a playwright, and an author. His notable works included Faust, Wilhelm Meister's Apprenticeship, and Elective Affinities. Next, we have Jane Austen, 1775 to 1817, an English author who wrote romantic fiction combined with social realism. So, her novel, including Sense and Sensibility, 1881, Pride and Prejudice in 1813, and Emma in 1816. Next, Honore de Balzac in 1799 to 1850. He is a French novelist and short story writer, and his short story is a La Commedia Humaine. Next, we have Alexandre Dumas, 1802 to 1870. He is a French author of historical dramas. His works including The Count of Monte Cristo in 1844 and The Three Musketeers in 1844. Next, Victor Hugo, 1802 to 1885. He is a French author and a poet. His novels, including Les Miserables in 1862 and Notre Dame de Paris in 1831. Next, we have Charles Dickens, 1812 to 1870. He is an English writer and a social critic, and his novels including Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, and A Christmas Carol. Next is Charlotte Brontë in 1816 to 1855, English novelist and poet from Haworth. His novel is Jane Eyre in 1847. Next, we have Henry David Thoreau in 1817 to 1862. He is an American poet, writer, and leading member of the Transcendentalist movement. His work including Thoreau's Walden in 1854. Next is Emily Bronte, 1818 to 1848, an English novelist. So her novel, including Wuthering Heights in 1847. We have George Eliot in 1819 to 1880, pen name of Mary Ann Evans. His novel, including The Mill on the Floss in 1860, Silas Marner in 1861, Middlemarch 1871 to 72, and Dalian de Ronda in 1876. Next, we have Leah Tolstoy in 1828 to 1910. He is a Russian novelist and moral philosopher, and his epic novels including War and Peace in 1869 and Anna Karenina in 1877. Next, we have Fyodor Dostoevsky, 1821 to 1881. He is a Russian novelist, journalist, and philosopher. His notable works including Notes from Underground, Crime and Punishment, and The Idiot. We have here also Lewis Carroll in 1832 to 1898, Oxford mathematician and an author. His famous works including Alice in Wonderland, Through the Looking Glass, and The Snark. Next, we have Mark Twain, 1835 to 1910. He is an American writer and humorist, considered the father of American literature. His famous works including the Adventures of Tom Sawyer in 1876 and Adventures of Huckleberry Finn in 1885. Thomas Hardy, 1840 to 1928. He is an English novelist and a poet. So, these are his famous works, including Far from Madding Crown in 1874, Test of the D'Urbervilles in 1891, and Jude the Obscure in 1895. Next, we have Oscar Wilde, 1854 to 1900s. He is an Irish writer and a poet. His plays including The Importance of Being Earnest and The Picture of Dorian Gray. Kenneth Graham, 1859 to 1932. He is an author of The Wind and the Willows in 1908 and a classic of children's literature. We have George Bernard Shaw in 1856 to 1950. He is an Irish playwright and wit. His famous works including Pygmalion in 1912, Man and Superman in 1903, Back to Methuselah on 1921. We have here also Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, 1859 to 1930. He is a British author of historical novels, and these are some of his short stories, including Sherlock Holmes, The Hound of the Baskervilles in 1902, and Sign of Four in 1890. Next, we have Beatrice Potter in 1866 to 1943. Beatrice Potter is an English conservationist and author of imaginative children's books. So his works including Tales of Peter Rabbit in 1902. We have here also Marcel Proust, 1871 to 1922. He is a French author, and his epic novel including A la Cherche du Temps Perdu, or in English, In Search of the Lost Time. Next, we have William Somerset Maugham, 1874 to 1965. William is a British novelist and a writer, and his notable works including The Moon and Sixpence in 1916, The Razor's Edge in 1944, and also Of Human Bondage in 1915. Next, we have P.G. Wodehouse, 1881 to 1975, an English comic writer, best known for his humorous and satirical stories about the English upper classes, such as Jeeves and Wooster and Blandings Castle. Next, we have Virginia Woolf, 1882 to 1941. She is an English modernist writer, a member of the Bloomsbury Group. His famous novels including Mrs. Dalloway in 1925, To the Lighthouse in 1972, 1927, and Orlando in 1928. James Joyce in 1882 to 1941. James Joyce is an Irish writer from Dublin. His novels including Ulysses in 1920-22, and his other works including also Dubliners in 1914, Finnegan's Wake in 1939. Next, we have the H. Lawrence, 1885 to 1930, an English poet, novelist, and a writer. His best-known works are Sons and Lovers, The Rainbow, Woman in Love, and Lady Chatterley's Lover in 1928. Next, we have Agatha Christie, 1890 to 1976. Agatha is a British fictional crime writer. Many of her books focus on series featuring her detectives Poirot and Mrs. Marple. Next, we have J.R.R. Tolkien, 1892 to 1973, a professor of Anglo-Saxon and English at Oxford University. His best-known works including The Hobbit and the Silmarillion, translation of Beowulf. Vera Brittain in 1893 to 1970. Vera is a British writer best known for her autobiography, Testament of Youth in 1933, sharing her traumatic experience of the First World War. Next, we have F. Scott Fitzgerald, 1896 to 1940. F. Scott is an American author and iconic writer of the Jazz Age. His notable works including The Great Gatsby in 1925, Tender is the Night in 1934. Next, we have Enid Blyton, 1897 to 1968. Enid Blyton is a British children's writer known for her series of children's books, The Famous Five and The Secret Seven. Blyton wrote an estimated 800 books over 40 years. Next, we have C.S. Lewis, 1898 to 1963, an Irish or English author and professor at Oxford University. Lewis is best known for the Chronicles of Narnia, a children's fantasy series, also well known as a Christian apologist. Next, Ernest Hemingway, 1899 to 1961. Ernest is a groundbreaking modernist American writer. Some of his famous works including For Whom the Bell Tolls in 1940 and A Farewell to Arms in 1929. Next, we have Vladimir Nabokov, 1899 to 1977, a Russian author of Lolita, 1955, and Pale Fire, 1962. Barbara Catland, 1901 to 2000, one of his most prolific and best-selling authors of the romantic fiction genre. Some suggest she has sold over 2 billion copies worldwide. Next is John Steinbeck, 1902 to 1968, American writer who captured the social change experience in the US around the time of the Great Depression. Some of John Steinbeck's famous works including Of Mice and Men in 1937, The Grapes of Wrath in 1939, and The Last is East of Eden in 1952. Next, we have George Orwell in 1903-1950, an English author, and his famous works including Animal Farm and 1984. Samuel Beckett, 1906 to 1989. Samuel Beckett is an Irish avant-garde modernist writer. Beckett wrote minimalist and thought-provoking plays such as Waiting for Godot in 1953 and Endgame in 1957. He was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1969. Albert Camus, 1913 to 1960. Albert Camus is a French author, journalist, and a philosopher. His famous works including The Myth of Sisyphus, The Stranger, and The Plug. Next, we have Roald Dahl, 1916 to 1990. Roald is an English author best known for his children's books such as Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, James and the Giant Peach, and the BFG. Alexander Solzhenitsyn in 1918 to 2008, Russian author, historian, and a political critic. Solzhenitsyn was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1970 for his work in exposing the nature of Soviet totalitarianism. Example, the Gulag Archipelago in 1965 to 1967. Next, we have J.D. Salinger, 1919 to 2010. J.D. is an American author. Most of his influential novel, The Catcher in the Rye in 1951, wrote many short stories for New Yorker magazine, such as A Perfect Day for Banana Fish. Next, we have Joseph Heeler, 1923 to 1999. Joseph Heller is an American novelist who wrote satirical and black comedy. His most famous work is Catch 2022 in 1961, a satire on the futility of war. Next, we had Gabriel Garcia Marquez in 1927 to 2014. Gabriel Garcia Marquez is a Colombian author. He wrote 100 Years of Solitude in 1967, The Autumn of the Patriarch in 1975, Love in the Time of Cholera 1985, and also Nobel Prize in Literature in 1982. Next, we have Anne Frank. Anne Frank in 1929 to 1945. Anne Frank is a Dutch Jewish diarist known for her diary. Anne Frank published post- posthumously by her father, recalling her life hiding from Gestapo in occupied Holland. Next, we have Salman Rushdie, 1947. Anglo-Indian author, his works combine elements of magic realism, satire, and historical fiction. His notable works including Midnight's Children 1981, Shame in 1983, and Satanic Verse in 1988. Stephen King, 1947. Stephen King is an American author of contemporary horror, supernatural fiction, suspense, science fiction, and fantasy. One of the best-selling authors of the modern times. Next, we have George R. R. Martin, 1948, American author of epic fantasy series A Song of Ice and Fire. His international best-selling series of fantasy has been adapted for the screen as The Game of Thrones. Next, we have Douglas Adams in 1952 to 2001. Douglas is a British writer of humorous and obscure science fiction. Adams wrote a best-selling trilogy of 5 books, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which began as a BBC play. J.K. Rowling, in 1965, British author of the Harry Potter series, which has become the best-selling book series of all time. Her first book was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone in 1997. Rowling has also published adult fiction such as The Casual Vacancy 2012 and The Cuckoo's Calling in 2013. Next is Khalid Hosseini, 1965, Afghan-born American writer. Notable works include The Kite Runner 2003, A Thousand Splendid Suns 2007, and The Mountains Echoed in 2013. And that's all for my part. Thank you for listening and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.